Hi, it's time for an edition of the Thought Project. Just so you know, I'm outside again today enjoying the fresh air. And this is going to be a special episode where I focus more on trafficking issues, which is a huge economic issue in the US and around the world, apparently. After my experience in the DC area, I lived there for over 19 years, around 19 years. Um, and I have to get back to, in the last episode, I talked about the fact that I eventually decided that Kendrick, who was supposed to be this like fabulous head of a Hollywood agency, is now a 60-year-old man plus man is just another victim of trafficking, as far as I know. Um, and a candidate for an APS report or two from probably other people than me. But what you have to look at is that he'd always said that he had to do what Cersei said, the woman nicknamed Cersei, who pretended to be my mom and is not. And it actually wouldn't even matter if she had been because she just, well, the fact matters, she was proven not to be. But the point is, she was a massive trafficker and is still alive today and free in the U.S. and got away with dry runs in the Pentagon. Even after I've testified and hundreds of people have testified and entire states have gotten angry at her, she's still free. And her supposed husband, Wilhelm, is also still free. How is that even possible in the U.S. today? That they, as many crimes they committed, as many people they murdered, as much as I went through, they're just still free hanging out in Pennsylvania. So you really have to seriously question that. And of course, she is actually Patricia's mother, and they're Russian, living free in the U.S. And this is why I question the DoD and all the different projects they do abroad. I said, you're going to go abroad, but you're going to let these people hang out here in the U.S. and traffic people, and they're Russian and they're illegal. Because I had to go through a really long fight to get my protective order, and there was a lot of money stolen, not just from me, but from other people, like literally millions. And they were deemed a part of the KGB, which is now called the FSB, but they're still free. This is why you have hearings in Congress constantly. This is why the FBI keeps getting called up. This is why their agencies keep being called up because there's no reason for her and Wilhelm to be free today, or Patricia, or Dan or Buffalo Bill. And I'm going to swing back around to a recent event that's going to explain exactly why that's really not okay, considering, some of the events that have come out in the news over this past weekend. This being Sunday in the U.S. I don't know where you are in the world watching this, but the reality is that Cersei was essentially the head of some major organization tied to Russia, which turned out to be the FSB. She's extremely dangerous. She lives on a signet system, and she does pretty much whatever she wants. And she gets to go to court and walk off with impunity and not be put in prison. And there's no really good reason for it. I spent a long time talking to the federal government and changing their attitudes about women so that they begin to see petite women as more of a danger than most of the time people see them as. To recognize that there's a lot more going on in the world than just physical size and structure. And there's legalities of it all, but she was someone that, she managed to get a hold of my school money when I was at Luther College, and, she had Patricia installed there, Buffalo Bill, and some other people, and she was enough to scare Kendrick and some of the other people into thinking the money had to be given over. She had another woman installed on the staff who is the mother of Kendrick's current spouse, which he told me he was forced to marry, and or had said even before the marriage happened that he was going to be forced to marry her. And the real question is, and also the reason I guess that he couldn't properly employ people and only employed Russians. So what I'm trying to figure out is who exactly is she? I mean, she's a crazy little white Russian woman that acts nuts and has no business being free in this country. And I look at Biden with a trip to see the CCP and all these other issues, and I think, what are you thinking that you would let this person be free in the U.S.? And I call her a person because I didn't know she's definitely female, but why? Why would you let them remain free to cause problems for everyone else? There's just no good reason for any of it. And, I mean, would you compare her to Jada Pinkett Smith? Because I don't know that Jada Pinkett Smith is that quite prolific, but she certainly is the progenitor of people like that. Meghan Markle causing disturbances around New York City over the summer, what could be considered a dry run, actually is more the actual correct term for her behavior there, which most people wouldn't even stop to consider, but that's why they got in trouble. That's why Prince Harry and her got in trouble. That's why the literal king of England, King Charles, and Queen Camilla do not talk to them anymore. People, you gotta take this stuff apart and think of it for yourself. But who is she anymore? I mean, I just don't understand why this person is still free. And you got to consider that's still the major issue in the U.S. is that there's a huge tolerance of trafficking, and especially when women do it. And I specialized a lot in my both journalism and in public relations. And then finally, when I went into mandated reporting on tracking the women that were responsible for some of it, not just men. Yeah, I did report some men, but I also spent a lot of time tracking women. I'm far more suspicious of women, actually. Women steal people's kids and sell them. Women, it was women in Iowa that told me that they were planning to have me trafficked and Kendrick trafficked, all these other people trafficked. It was women at the Dubuque Mall that used to sell their little kids in the 80s. It wasn't men, it's genetic females. And, even the idea that someone would dress up as a woman and be treated differently has had to be questioned because we've seen, of course, a rise in crime committed by men dressed up as women too. But you have to just know that this idea of like defining people by gender and then assuming they are powerful. Well, Cersei is powerful enough to bring in a bunch of people from Peru, which is the biggest cocaine producer in the world. She brought their network into the U.S. The DEA hasn't been able to stop her, and they've had plenty of testimony. So you really have to put all this stuff in perspective. Um, I want to talk a little bit more about who mandated reporters are because what I found was the biggest problem with DC area was that so many people didn't want to do mandated reporting, which you really have to do. It's illegal not to be a mandated reporter, and people like Cersei will actually catch you for not reporting. So make sure you always report because sometimes the worst criminals are the ones that will try to get you for not reporting on something. So I always report on stuff. I always do because I know I have to. Um, because I worked in home health for 5 years because of what I knew. And it's kind of comical, but I mean, I ran, so who are mandated reporters? And I can tell you what some of the things I saw. But, there were doctors, nurses, home health aides, respiratory therapists, teachers, teachers' aides, dentists, hospice workers. Those are all the people who actually had to do mandated reporting in their jobs. So if you don't want something reported, then I wouldn't go around telling them too much about your life or what you're up to. And if you are, you need to consider that they might decide you're trying to set them up possibly or worse, and they're probably going to report you. So, you know, be considerate of other people. Cersei was not, and that's actually how she got herself in trouble a lot, is because she would try to set up mandated reporters, and a lot of them would report her for that alone because it was a sign of guilt. So, don't try to play, federal agent, cop, whatever. You're not. And, focus on who you want to be in this life, in this world. You'll keep yourself clear of these issues. But, unfortunately, it is important to know the law. So if you've been a mandated reporter at one point in your life, you're always going to be counted on for that. Um, like for me, I also took like a state CNA course, so I definitely be counted on. And it was the state of Virginia, which is terrible on labor trafficking, anyways. But I knew that I had to write reports and I had to turn them in. So, even a state as bad as Virginia, I mean, where they just busted a huge brothel ring, and I mean, Virginia is so messed up that you're looking at a situation that developed over the weekend currently, where they may end up being held responsible for what's gone on. And, I say all this because far before I sort of brought things to a close with Kendrick like 10 years ago or whatever, I was just talking to him as a friend at that point. That's all I could be to the guy, you know, just tell him the truth about a situation as a legal immigrant or whatever he was and tell him that he was basically being set up, even with the marriages, because um, he supposedly didn't even have like love relationships with either of these people. And so I said, well, the truth is, at any time you could be dragged into a court of law for adultery. And as a man, you're more likely to get in trouble for it. But the reality is that in any state, there is no such thing as marriage, like marriage just being open in the U.S., like anywhere. And there's no such thing as just giving somebody else a person's paycheck. And there's actually no legal like stipulation for paying people based on race. Like that was all one big setup of a guy who I became more and more convinced was just a really confused immigrant, basically. And if anything, he probably would owe me money for at least explaining how the U.S. legal system works and the U.S. government because he really didn't know the basics. That was kind of sad to see for somebody who's that old. But and then of course I spent all that time doing mandated reporting and working at home health. But what I saw in the DC is that there were a lot of people who were just really bratty and they would work in healthcare and wouldn't want to actually do the reporting. And then there was a friend of people that were just dumb. I had a doctor who was so crazy. She tried to tell me in my late 20s that I had to go work as a prostitute. I said, no, I got to work as one. And she really thought she was better than everyone else. I mean, that was the craziest thing you'd ever say to somebody. Like, does she even have a medical license? I had tried to report her back then, and there was a strike on my home. And that was how the government started to figure out how bad she was, like how big and bad she was, because she was tied to Cersei. And so there was a huge investigation. It had to be put together so she didn't know about it. And of course, now there's been this brothel busted in Northern Virginia. And I think she's probably one of the people who's part of running it. Somebody was mean enough and weird enough to tell people that they had to work as prostitutes And then she would try to tell them they had to be fat and ugly if they weren't. Like, that's just completely abusive and psychologically weird. It's very much borderline behavior, but it's also just completely disgusting. And there were way too many people that got excited about trying to protect her as a doctor who was exploiting people or trying her best to. Just had to get her out of my life. I put her through a good long investigation. Like, she was really sorry she ever bothered me. And I just don't have time for it. And I don't think anyone else does either. You go to a medical appointment because it is medical practitioners that fail the most. They're the ones that don't do the reports they're supposed to. They're the ones that get in trouble for not prescribing needed medications that they're supposed to know. They're the ones that get in trouble the most for practicing outside their license. So while HHS is the best on dealing with trafficking and reporting, it's also the worst because they have so many people that want to get into the medical field simply to get paid off by traffickers and get people trafficked. And it turned out she was guilty of all that. But so I'm just giving you some feedback on all of that information so people understand, because I've been, because I did get into it and I did learn how it all worked. Like HHS has a Polaris project, which is supposed to be super successful, and it hasn't been a success. And in the end, the Department of Labor had to be the one to really pick things up. And of course, there's a number of agencies that actually handle these issues that are much larger. And of course, you have the complete reconfiguration of DHS because under the FBI, there were too many situations like the bizarre, you know, Fast and Furious situation under the Obama administration where all those guns were going out. There is no such thing in the U.S. as an investigation where goods are sent out and simply tracked, and it's okay for government employees to get paid off or to steal or for anybody else to get those. Like, it actually doesn't exist anymore. It's been a massive policy change. So if you didn't know that, now you know. But, it's the same thing with labor trafficking. It isn't okay to tell somebody to work for free just to try to track the networks and catch people. And a lot of it has to do with the way technology has changed. So things can be tracked better now. So nobody can come to you and say, we have to do an investigation, go work for free, or go do this, so you can investigate. No, just no, forget it. Not doing that. It's against the law, and it's actually illegal for them to even ask. So you just really have to kind of know your own rights and understand that. And DHS does a lot of seminars on this. The fact that, there's a problem with government employees sometimes being the traffickers. And then other people taking on positions of authority that are just dishonest that have to be managed and dealt with. And so it's important to know that. The big thing about this weekend that I saw was that Taylor Swift is now in some really serious trouble, and it's really weird. But a woman named Ana Clara Benavides Machado died on Friday at her concert in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And the situation is that fans are not allowed to take water into the stadium despite excessively high temperatures. It was one of the hottest days on record in the country of Brazil. It was 138 degrees Fahrenheit that day. And the temperature at the time of the concert was 102.4 degrees. So it's important to note that this was at the Nilton Santos Olympic Stadium on Friday night, just this past Friday. The mayor of Rio de Janeiro had asked for changes in the concert policy beforehand to provide water to concert goers. And Swift actually needed to cancel it. Taylor Swift needed to cancel it. Her team needed to cancel it. And it's always important to know that, the fans were so desperate for water during the show and so hot that they were actually crying and going out of their way and waving their phones around and trying to put up signs for help. And people were actually just really suffocating. There weren't a lot of reports of people actually leaving, which makes it sound like they were actually trapped. It sounds from reports like people were actually trapped at the concert and freaking out and looking for water, which is like something of a horror film. And ABC News actually interviewed a woman who happened to be at the show from Los Angeles, Elizabeth Morin, who said it was like a sauna. So got on ABC News for that much. The article also looked a little too positive for Swift in some places, and some of the lead was actually buried. But the key point is that the government of Brazil is not happy. And they are extremely upset because they did ask for those changes in advance. Like, she needed to cancel that concert, or her staff did. Somebody needed to have the sense to cancel it. And in the end, she's going to be held accountable for this because they've already started an investigation. They're doing an autopsy or have done an autopsy already on the body. And it's all going to reflect back on her management agency, that's CAA, for helping Swift, for being her management if they keep her. I think they're just going to try to drop her. But you're looking at a situation where there were so many considerable issues. And what I have to note here is that, of course, she was somebody that Circe and Wilhelm had put together and set, like, they put her career in motion. And they had talked about her going back all the way to the 80s. So I had reported her all this a long time ago, but the government just let it go forward, or I don't know. Well, they didn't totally let it go forward. They let her masters get taken, and they put some stuff together with her here in the U.S. to try to get some control over her. I think even monitored her concerts here. Obviously, as soon as she got outside the U.S. for like 5 minutes, there's this weird event in Brazil. But the point is that Buffalo Bill, the person I know that does her main guy and does all her design, he was the one who stole the material from me, for her, and from other people. He's the one who's responsible for a lot of these women who've been beat up and murdered by her people. And it's important to know all that, because it means she's basically just a member of the FSB, which used to be called the KGB, and she's Russian, and that's all well known. And, those are her mentors. But, I have to look at the situation that she's gone out publicly and complained about losing her master's. She's been very spoiled. Uh, who is Scooter Braun? I don't even know if it matters. But, how fast do some people fall? And she's in trouble in Brazil. And I can tell you the U.S. government really isn't going to go out of their way to protect her. Just look at past cases and people. I mean, it's kind of obvious she's on her own on this. And I think, you have to consider that Patricia, Dan, Buffalo Bill, they're all hackers. They say, well, I'm not hacking. So, of course, they're probably going to go and try to help her out. I'm sure Russia is going to get involved just to try to help her. But, there's a real issue there with her just not entirely understanding who she is and maybe not even caring. Because I saw very clearly with Patricia Hearsay both that they had borderline psychopathy disorders and they were diagnosed as such. And also that they were people who were part of the FFP. So I would figure at this point, just looking at, like there's all these pictures of Taylor Swift trying to do photo ops of handing out water, and people are putting up signs they need help, and she's just ignoring them. Like, that the person is going to be in serious trouble with the Brazilian government at this point. And that's really what the reports are saying. And I don't see the U.S. government putting themselves at risk to try to get in Brazil's face over it. I think Brazil's going to do what they want to do if they're angry at her for her behavior or violated their legal system is what I gotta say. Angry is too emotional, but I mean the point is she's violated a number of policies they have. Um, she's not coming back from this. Um, and I knew something like this was going to happen because of how much it got in the U.S. But you also consider how much of what was set up was done in Virginia. Because Buffalo Bill did a lot of stealing in Virginia, so I don't know. I don't see the U.S. government. I don't see the other 49 states wanting to support Taylor Swift getting out of Brazil. I don't even see her fans caring at this point because a bunch of them got mad at her over her trying to make them all re-buy her music because she lost her masters, right? So she's already gone through some penalties here in the U.S. and didn't really pay attention. And now she's out there in South America, and even South America doesn't have time for it. Brazil doesn't have time for it. I don't see the rest of the U.S. trying to protect Virginia, the state of Virginia, on this one. The problems with trafficking and what's been set in motion there. I just don't see the rest of the U.S. or the federal government trying to protect Virginia from whatever Brazil may come up with in the end, because this could very well come back to being a U.S. government's fault, and they're going to be Virginia's fault, to be the state of Virginia's fault. So, the state of Virginia hasn't been really running things very well for a while. So, but if you're wondering about some of the things I did talk about with Kendrick before I told you you're basically going to have an APS report, but the thing is that I talk about legal system, like for example, supply chains. Like he thought because he put goods in stores for people that it was like a gift for them. And I said, no, you're actually a really good business person who's good at getting product moved out to stores for people to buy it. You're not actually considered someone who's giving a person a gift. It's not a gift when the person buys the item. He actually didn't know that. And in the end, I think that that's just an example of something he didn't really understand. And I just chose in the end, I felt bad for him that he was stuck dealing with all those people, and I was making my plans to get away with some of them, but really away from some of them, or at least all of them. I do, you do your best, but I cut contact with a number of them. That was what I was allowed to do as a U.S. citizen. Go to DHS for that kind of help. Unfortunately, there's a real problem if you're not a full citizen in the U.S. You may really not want to stay in the U.S. because somebody like Sarah Wilhelm, who was also probably not an actual citizen, can take a lot of advantage of you, and your rights and what to do about it are going to be a lot more limited. So try and get away from some of these people, or even all of them, could be a lot harder for somebody in his position. And it's hard enough for me as an actual U.S. citizen. But I chose to do what a mandated reporter would do and cut things off as a professional, and then, say I can't just keep talking to you, consulting with you for free on this, and I've got to go. I know you're having problems, but you got to find an actual lawyer to like fix it for you with them to get you away from them, and maybe you divorce from your current wife and from the next one that you apparently have to marry. So, whatever. It's something everyone has to kind of walk their own path in life. But as somebody who was interested in trafficking issues and came to understand myself, I was more than happy to explain to the guy because there's a lot I knew he just didn't understand. He really just didn't know. Um, and that's why I decided to stay on the report to ABS because I realized that he really was a victim of Buffalo Bill and Cersei Wilhelm, Patricia, Dan, all these crazy people that seem to never really go away, and the government doesn't seem to understand how to just put them away. Like, just put them in prison already. They're nuts. There's been more people report them. They're massive traffickers, and they've caused more than enough problems in multiple states and in other countries. Like, let's move on. So that's actually the thought project for today on human trafficking. And what the thought project is really about. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Have a good one.